Hey everyone, I'm Mark from Novation and I'm here today at Bot DJ in Manchester, and we brought with us our Novation Peak, our 8-voice polyphonic synthesizer. So let's delve into it and take a quick look. So first of all, let's answer the question, what is Peak? Well, it's an 8-voice polyphonic synthesizer which is using technology which is unlike most other synthesizers on today's market. Whereas it's merging both analog and digital technology together, but the very brain or the very heart of Peak is an FPGA processor. And this processor is working with the oscillators in the generation of the waveforms, but also handling the control side of the synth as well. So a lot of the LFOs, the shaping tools, the envelopes, and the digital effects section as well. And that's married with 100% analog filter, very similar to the one used on the base station, but tuned with increased resonance and adjustable key tracking as well. And that 100% analog filter is then also coupled with 3 stages of analog distortion. So pre-filter, post-filter, and after the VCA, which kind of gives you this real bite and grit. So marrying the digital technology with the analog technology kind of gives you that real kind of bite and grit that you really want from the analog filter and distortion path as well. So as we said, the guts or the brain of Peak is running off an FPGA processor, and working with the oscillators, that's kind of oversampling the waveforms at 24 megahertz, so 24 million times a second. It's cycling this waveform, which kind of makes oscillators that sound entirely analog, like you can't tell the difference between digital or analog. So starting with the oscillator section, so we said that the FPGA is working with the oscillators. The oscillators on Peak are NCOs, or numerically controlled oscillators. One of the really good things about Peak is that we have 3 visible oscillators. Quite often on synths around this price point you have a 3rd oscillator, but a lot of the controls are not quite visible. So if we just bring oscillator 1 up on the mixer, have a look, we've got our coarse and fine settings here for the pitch of the oscillator. So coarse adjusts the pitch over an octave, and fine obviously adjusts that over a semitone as well. Next to this we have our 4 selectable waveforms. So by default we can initialize the patch and send that to a sawtooth waveform, but we also have sine wave and triangle, sawtooth, which we've heard, and square wave as well. Now, one of the really good things about Peak is obviously because these are NCO and digital oscillators, we have the access of the Moore setting on each oscillator, which allows us to turn each oscillator into a wavetable oscillator. So within the oscillator settings in Peak, we can now adjust the wavetable that we want on this oscillator. So those that are familiar with some of the Novation products will recognize this as the base station sine wave. But there are many different wavetables for you to select, and what this really does is gives you a lot more kind of building blocks or different sounds to your palette when you're using Peak in sound design. And we have the option to change that on each and every oscillator. So in terms of kind of layering up those wavetables, it just really adds some more complex sounds to Peak. On each oscillator as well, we also have something called shaper mount as well. Now, shaper mount can be used really well, for example, here on the sawtooth setting. What you'll hear is super saw or double kind of saw edge sound. So we can hear those kind of saws phasing off. If we were hooked up to an oscilloscope, you would see like a kind of double sawtooth sound. And obviously if we add that to the square wave, we kind of introduce a bit of pulse width modulation as well. That's a little bit about the oscillator controls, and obviously that's mirrored for each of the 3 oscillators. But one of the really good things about Peak as well in terms of the layout, I get so many compliments on the layout of Peak. We also have various different kind of normal or hardwired modulation on the front panel. For example, the shaper mount here we're using the manual control, but what we can do if we want to is we can actually modulate that from other areas of the synth. So for example, if we change this to LFO1, we can have this modulated by the LFO1. So LFO1 there modulating the shape amount, and if we just touch on the LFOs themselves, they actually controlled by the FPGA as well. So we mentioned the FPGA is handling a lot of the control side of peak as well, and the LFOs are certainly to do with the FPGA as well. So what you kind of get is LFOs that are really detailed. I mean, they go well into the audio range. So for example, if we have a look at the modulation for the pitch, we have LFO2, which can also modulate the pitch of the oscillator as well. So if we just knock the LFO2 depth out, we can begin to hear that LFO2 is modulating the pitch, and we can play around with the rates here. And on the LFOs we have two different rates, so we have low, high and sync as well, being a third one, so we can actually sync it to its internal clock or sync it to something else. So let's take a listen to the LFOs. So we can hear they go well into the audio range, and that was just on the low setting, so we can hear it on high now. So the LFOs go well into the audio range. Again, that's down to the FPGA and the technology that we have inside Peak. Touching quickly on the envelopes, there's 3 ADSR envelopes on Peak. So we have one that's to do with the amp envelope. We have 2 modulation envelopes which can be selected here. So they can be used for different sources of modulation on Peak as well. So that's the LFOs and the envelopes. And as we said before, that digital technology is then married with a 100% analog filter. And again, for those that are familiar with the Novation range, it's very similar to the base station filter, only with increased resonance and adjustable key tracking. So we can really kind of use the resonance here to kind of really make that filter squill. It is a state variable filter, so we have a low pass setting, we have a band pass, and we also have high pass setting as well. So as well as that, there's some filter modulation that can be applied to the filter direct on the front panel. So we have Oscillator 3 filter modulation. So using an oscillator signal to then modulate the filter as well. So that's 100% analog filter, as we said, and that then moves, from the oscillator section into the mixer section, where we can blend the different sound sources of the oscillators. We can add some noise as well if we want. It has a noise circuit and also ring modulation as well. And also, once it's passed through into the filter, we can add extra kind of distortion, and that then flows into a pretty detailed effects section. One of the really good things that I get a lot of compliments about is the reverb on Peak. So again, because this is being driven by the digital side, the FPGA, we get a really detailed reverb. We also have a digital delay and a digital chorus as well. And there's a lot of kind of effects settings that you can dial into and get different kind of reverb sizes and stuff like that. So last thing I kind of want to show you about Peak as well is that we have a lot of normal modulation or hardwired modulation on the front panel, but Peak has a really detailed modulation matrix. For example, this kind of works very similar to like a modular system where you're taking sources and destinations with wires and cables, but it's all handled in the modulation matrix of Peak. So for example, one of the things that people may or may not know about Peak as well, it's very capable in linear FM synthesis as well. So what that kind of means is we can move to FM, say 3:1 here, and what we can actually do is use an oscillator signal, so oscillator 3, and then fold that back into oscillator 1, and that kind of gives you those kind of really sci-fi type bell sounds. So it's a very detailed modulation matrix, and also it has the ability of a CV modulation input as well. So Eurorack guys, modular guys can use a CV source to modulate certain areas of Peak. So thanks for watching. For more information on any Novation products, please visit botdj.com or head down to your local Bot DJ store where you can get hands-on on all of our Novation products.